Okay, so anyway, and sorry for the background sound. I'm like on my lanai and there's like an air conditioner humming. I don't even have an air conditioner on the Big Island. So I'm like, what is that sound? Anyway, we arrived on Saturday, which apparently was dubbed Super Swell Saturday because it was the biggest swell of the year. And one of the biggest ones that they've had, or the biggest one that they've had here in a few years. So we got off the airplane and drove straight to Jaws, which is kind of northeast of Paia, for those of you that know Maui. And it was epic. You should look at my feed on Facebook or on Instagram because I have some sick videos. I mean, and this was like after the peak, I think. Like there were waves where I was like, oh my gosh, someone is on that and they look so tiny. I think they were saying 65 to 80-foot waves that day. So it was pretty awesome. So we just went straight to to Jaws from the airport. My daughter was like, where the fuck are we going? Well, she didn't say that, although she could. It wouldn't surprise me if she did. But anyway, so I've been here and, I had thought about what should I do for the podcast this week? And I was thinking about, you know what? I'm going to talk about how to fucking disagree because as a culture, not even as a culture, but as humans, we kind of suck at it. But I think there are some cultures that handle it better than others. And I haven't been too impressed with the one that I've been growing up in. So I kind of want to talk about what I see with how people disagree now and sort of just some suggestions because one example is we look at maybe our intimate relationships. It's so obvious when we disagree with people about politics, right? But let's just think about even our intimate relationships when we have our friends or our partners or our family members, so more like our closer relationships. When someone disagrees with us, we get like extra triggered. So think about that. Like, why do we care so much when someone close to us disagrees? And there are many reasons that I won't go into right now, but one of the main ones is we like to feel connected to the people that we care about. We like to feel connected to our partners. We like to feel connected to our family members. But when they disagree with us, we feel this separation, right? We feel that there's a distance now. Like, oh, wait a minute. I thought that like you were on my team. And now I don't feel like you're on my team because we disagree about this. And obviously, with some lighter things like what's your favorite food or what's your favorite restaurant or what's your favorite movie, like that we can disagree about almost jokingly and sort of banter. But for the bigger things, we can take it really personally. And I think that we do in large part, because we want to feel connection with the people. And when they disagree with us, we feel disconnected, or we have a story, a thought that it means that we're disconnected. But what's ironic is then we pick a fight, right? Or we disagree very loudly, or we disagree like, um, in a way that pushes them away. So even though we are reacting because we want to feel connected, what we're doing is actually pushing people away, right? And so it can be really insightful to be aware of like, why am I choosing to battle about this right now? Why can't I just let it go? Because when it comes to relationships, we really want to be able to pick our battles, right? We want to be able to say, is this really worth going to bat for, right? And usually it's not. But I just wanted you to be aware that that is one of the things going on, right? That we want to build connection and then we don't, though. Okay. So, what about, how do we disagree, right? So, on Facebook a while ago, I forget what I was posting, something political, of course. And someone was like, oh, I think it was about like the World Health Organization or something. because like people have conspiracy theories about the World Health Organization, like these sweeping theories. And I'm not saying that there aren't bad seeds within the WHO, but anyway, I was just kind of being like, hey, you know, I'm kind of a WHO fan. I'm a hoe fan, right? And so, and this woman was like, please unfriend me because we clearly have differences of opinion. And I was like, isn't that interesting that there are so many people that don't want to spend time or even hear differing opinions, right? I mean, how many of you have done that? I've done that, right? Like I've definitely turned on the news and been like, shut the fuck up. I don't want to hear this. And I just like turn it off, right? But I have also intentionally back in the day, like listened to Rush Limbaugh. Like, what is the other side thinking and why? I will occasionally watch Fox News to see, you know, why is the other side thinking what it's thinking and why? And, you know, when I moved to Southern Oregon from the San Francisco Bay Area, I went from basically having everyone around me agree with my political ideas to moving to an area where I lived in a more liberal town, but I worked in a more conservative town as a midwife. And so, you know, I would have these interesting conversations with people. Like I was eating a salad at work and someone would walk by and she said, oh, are you eating your Ashland salad? Like she saw my eating a salad as like being liberal. And I was like, that's interesting. What's up with that? I mean, this is like weird things like that happening every day, right? But even though at first I was sort of put off by it, eventually I was like, you know what? I'm going to choose to see this, that this is a way for me to have exposure to different thoughts and ideas that I may not have had exposure to, right? It was sort of when I started understanding why people hunt, even though I'm not a hunter, even though it's not my jam. I was working with so many people that went hunting, and I was just like, well, I like them. They're not crazy. Let me find out what they get out of this. And you can still choose to disagree, yet sort of, you know, have an understanding, right? And a lot of us feel like we want to disagree because we feel a moral obligation, right? Like if someone believes something that we think is harmful, we need to argue and convince them that they're wrong and that we're right. And part of the story that goes along with that is we think, oh, if I agree with them, if I listen to them, if I give space to their ideas, then that's condoning them or accepting them or promoting them. And that's just absolutely not true, right? It's not. We need to see that providing space and listening and trying to understand is actually our best chance at someone listening to us and our ideas. When we go into a conversation with an agenda of changing someone's mind, they notice that shit. I mean, when I worked at Outward Bound with Youth at Risk, you know, I built their trust through showing them that I understood their predicament. You know, they'd be like, what are you? You probably grew up hiking and doing all this like, you know, upper middle class white shit. And I was like, no, I didn't. I like played basketball and I grew up in the ghetto and I did drugs and I drank and I like was abused, like all this stuff. And they're like, oh, you understand, right? Then they were willing to hear what I said. But even with my understanding, if I went in with an agenda to change their mind about something, like there was this guy that was killing ants, like just for fun, and I'm Buddhist and I was like freaking out. And I went in to try to convince him on my own agenda, and they sniffed that shit from a mile. They're like, you don't care about me, right? I'm not gonna listen to you because you don't care about me. You're just coming in with your own agenda. So the first time I approached him about this, I believe I did something unskillful like saying, are you fucking sick in the head? So not Buddhist of me. But what I ended up realizing was, there was another way to approach it. So later, I just sat down next to him and I said, hey, you and I don't really like each other a lot. We differ on a lot of different things, but we can respect each other, right? You don't have to agree with me. I don't have to agree with you, but we can respect each other. So could you at least do me the favor and not kill things in front of me? And what requests do you want to make? So it was like I was just being vulnerable and stating what I wanted and not trying to change his mind necessarily, right? And guess what? No one had ever spoken to him like that. Plenty of people had spoken to him like I did initially. Are you fucking crazy? He'd been asked that a whole bunch. He was a youth at risk, right? But to be like, hey, you do you, I need to do me, but how can we live together right now in the wilderness and get through this, right? So one of the things that we need to consider is really not feeling like we should argue because of our own agenda or to change the other person's mind. That actually does the complete opposite. But when we create space for it, actually then we make them feel safe. And guess what? They're more open to hearing our ideas sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, right? So I just wanted to chat real quick about some ideas for how to disagree. And one of the first things that I think is really important is to be very aware of your own values and your own beliefs and opinions and where they came from. I believe in the Clarity and Courage course. If you're in Freedom School, you have that in your bonus section. But in the Clarity and Courage course, I talk about like what part of your values were from parents, which part. So you can do this right now. Write down a list of your values and opinions that you feel strongly about, right? Maybe it's dietary, maybe it's lifestyle, maybe it's political. Where did those come from first? I remember when I was a teenager, I think, or maybe in my 20s, I watched this Oprah episode where she had a panel of white supremacist kids. And I can't remember if their parents were ever on it, but I do remember this scene very vividly where it was just kids on the panel. Some of them were related, some of them weren't. And there was a little Jewish boy in the audience and he raised his hand and he said, why do you hate me? I didn't hurt you. And he's about 8 and he's asking another little girl who's maybe a bit younger, like 6 or so, I don't know. And she leans over to her sister and she's like, why do we hate Jews again? And you could hear it from the mic and the whole audience is like, oh, like she was being taught this. Then her sister said something back and she goes, because you killed Jesus Christ. And it was just so sad, but also created empathy, right? It was like, oh my gosh, this little girl's being taught how to hate. Now, as the years go by, she's going to have that thought over and over and over, and she's going to believe it, and she's going to think it's a truth because that's what happens. When we think a thought over and over and over again, we believe it's true. First of all, just because our brain takes what's the path of least resistance, that neural groove that's in there, the more we think something, the more we believe it, and the more we start to believe that it's true. That's one of the biggest mistakes we make in thought work, right? We believe that our thoughts are facts when actually they're not. The other thing that our brain does is something called confirmation bias, which is when we have a belief and we look for proof unconsciously to reinforce it. So our brains are made to look for evidence to support our beliefs and to block out evidence that would disprove our beliefs. There's so many psychological studies about this phenomenon. It actually happens consistently, right? So think about that. No matter who you are, your brain naturally filters out things that disagree or are evidence against your beliefs, and it automatically lets in things that are evidence for the things you believe. So if we're going to counter this confirmation bias, we have to make a concerted effort to constantly question our beliefs, right? You know, when I was in high school, I remember people, you know, we'd have so many conversations. I almost missed like so many of those deeper conversations that I used to have on a daily basis, multiple times a day, right? Like on all our breaks and at lunch and after school. It's like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about death? What do you think of the afterlife? What do you think about psychedelics? What do you think about Coke? What do you think about this and that, right? And it was sort of like, thinking about it, I would say, well, today, this is what I believe, or today, this is what I think, because I didn't, I knew that that might change as new evidence came in, but I was also actively seeking new information, right? Waving to my kiddo who just woke up. I'm on my call, baby. So we actively, okay, I hate it when that happens. How many of you have kids and like when your kid walks in, you're like, now my brain has turned off. So anyway, we need to actively try to question our beliefs always because of this confirmation bias, right? That's why debate is so great. That's why I love, you know, when I go to a Tibetan monastery and I'm like, oh my gosh, I love seeing them out there debating. They're like, why do you believe this? And they start giving counter evidence. Well, but what about this? Doesn't this disprove that? And they're like, what? Like arguing against it back and forth, because then you know that you're questioning your beliefs and you're not just taking them for granted, and you're actively looking at evidence against it. And I really feel like we should make this a practice where we say, why do I believe what I do so powerfully? Why am I so offended when someone thinks differently about it, right? What am I attached to? What am I so attached to that I'm willing to suffer because this person has a differing opinion? Now, I'm not talking about when people do fucked up shit and like kill people and all that. That's a different topic. But like, why do we get so riled up? They're related, but still different. Like, why do I feel like I need to fight with this person because of their thoughts? Now, often it's because we take it personally, like we can let go of the smaller things, but when it comes to politics and stuff, we think, wow, but that could actually affect me, right? But just look deeper, that is still attachment to needing the world to be a certain way in order us to feel okay about it, right? All right, so step one, like reflecting on yourself and your own beliefs so that you understand where they came from. They're not going to come just out of the blue. They came from uh, people telling you about them. They came from life experiences. They came from your race and the culture you were raised in, your socioeconomic background, the country you were born in, the culture you grew up in, all of that, okay? I talk about that more on the pod that's going to drop tomorrow, so check that out. All right, so, oh my gosh, we only have a couple more minutes. So let me just look at my notes here because I wanted to just mention the steps. Okay, so step two, then you apply it to the other person with compassion, right? Why might they be thinking that? Like the little girl I told you about, was she raised that way? But if we just jump with like, gosh, you're so ignorant and such an asshole, right? Remember the story about Ram Dass that I keep talking about with Trump on his altar? I see you for your soul, not your karma. I see you for your soul, not your karma. Why might this person believe what they do? Our hearts open to one another more when we try to understand why, right? It's one of the reasons why I loved psychology and why I chose to major in it. Like, just such a deep desire to understand why people do what they do, right? Okay, then know that you're going to have a reaction when you hold space to listen to what this other person says. You're going to want to change them. You're going to want to have them be convinced that you're right. Just observe. Just notice that that's happening and observe and get curious. Make curiosity the antidote to your angst. oh, I'm getting a little triggered here. Why am I choosing to have a thought that's triggering me now? Let me get curious about them. Why are they believing that? And genuinely ask them, right? And remember, remind yourself that listening and creating space doesn't mean you're condoning or promoting or accepting or agreeing with what somebody's saying, right? And really, really remember that what someone thinks or believes is not who they are as a person, okay? It's a sentence in their mind. Ultimately, it's not who they are as a person. And you can choose to show up how you want in these scenarios, right? You can choose to show up in a certain way where you maybe do want to argue, at least go into it intentionally and understand what you're doing and what the effect might be of your actions, right? At least do it mindfully. You may choose to just listen. You may choose to say, and this is what I often do. I often say, like, you know, I appreciate you having a good understanding or having a willingness to have a civilized conversation about this. I still disagree with you, but thank you for at least having this conversation, right? Or I say, wow, that's amazing. Like, I think the complete opposite. Do you want to hear what my thoughts are? Right? And if they do, great. If they don't, that's okay. But most of the time, people say yes. And most of the time, I have more hope in humanity at the end of it, because most of the time at the end, there's myself and someone who thinks very differently than me, but we had an interaction that was very human, very caring. It could still be loaded with energy, but ultimately it led to something of more connection versus disconnection and pushing each other away. Okay? All right, y'all. So that is what I'm going to leave you with. The art of disagreeing, right? We need to always question our own beliefs on a regular basis, get curious about why other people think the way they do, see them for their soul, not their karma, question what we're attached to, and really have the wisdom to see the consequences of our actions. What is the best thing to do here, right? Is this the most compassionate conversation to have right now? What is my motivation? What am I attached to? Okay? Okay. Thank you for coming. The next time I talk to you, I will be back in my place. Thank goodness. Being by a road is driving me nuts. But anyway, thank you all for showing up. I'm sending you lots of love. Keep an eye out for Freedom School opening and tell your friends, because this year is going to be amazing. Okay, y'all, I love you. Have an amazing day. Thank you, Mel, for saying that. I'm so glad. May this be a benefit. Bye.